When I was a little boy in the 70s, I used to like listening to the radio. Not just listen with mother and music and movement. I liked to turn the dial very slowly to see what I could pick up from across the world. Moving across the frequencies, you never knew what was going to come next. It was as if each new station I discovered was a door opening onto a whole new world. There were bursts of foreign language or heavily accented English programs, and tense exchanges on local police radio. There were the ghostly tones of Midnight in Moscow, which was the call sign for Moscow radio. The one that I remember best is one that I never understood. It was an automated series of Morse code beeps which could just about be heard above the background static. It came about once a minute, a brief volley of dots and dashes that I tried and failed to decode. I used to wonder who had set this up and why. It could have been military or scientific or commercial. It could have been from anywhere on Earth or out in space. And there I was, a little boy in Manchester, opening the door on a mystery. The Nesiva Shalom understands the Jewish year in a way that reminds me of my early forays into the world of radio. Most of the time, God is barely accessible and barely visible. Each of our special times, Pesach, Shavuos, Sukkot, Chanukah, is like a gateway that opens briefly, allowing an unimpeded connection between God and us. So the passage of time is like turning the dial on a radio. Occasionally, we link up with something from beyond, and information pours in. These moments are not quite as simple as they seem. In the book of Koheles, King Solomon says, Gam es zeh lu'umas zeh asahu Elokim. God made this opposite that. Whenever we receive greater enlightenment from God, our freedom of choice risks being compromised. It is harder for us to do wrong when God's presence is that much more apparent in our lives. But when our capacity for choice is curtailed, so is the reality of our relationship with God. We risk becoming robots who follow Him because we have to, instead of people who love Him freely. Therefore, as King Solomon taught, a moment of greatness is always accompanied by a corresponding greater temptation to resent or ignore that opportunity. And in this way, our freedom of choice is always kept finely balanced. This means that precisely as each of the Yom Tov gates opens and God's voice rings out louder and clearer, we risk falling prey to the worst within ourselves or to the outside influences that most sap our strength. How then do we handle these mysterious incursions into our lives, these moments of great power and great danger? The Nesiva Shalom quotes our parasha, which always comes in the month of Elul, and he tells us what to do. Shovtim v'shoterim titein lecha b'chol sha'arecha. Place judges and enforcers at all your gates. Our parasha's opening line gives to us a warning. At each of the Chagim, the gates that open up between God and us, stand in judgment on yourself. Judge yourself. Watch out for the harm that you might do to yourself. Be aware of the temptation to smallness that grows in response to the summons to greatness. Reflect on the growth that you can attain in the year ahead and on the obstacles that stand in your way. If you find yourself tempted to flee or to look away, enforce within yourself the kind of conduct that will help you to capitalize on this brief moment of connection. Be strong enough to focus on the words in the Siddur, to be quiet when you need to be quiet, to speak when you need to speak, to celebrate your heritage and to winkle out its secret beauty, to set aside time for Torah. Impress yourself and your God instead of impressing other people. Thrill to that outpouring of beauty which cascades freely down from beyond into our world and our hearts. It's just 3.5 weeks until the biggest day in our lives. Of all our special days, Rosh Hashanah is most like that inscrutable, relentless Morse code signal. Rosh Hashanah is so holy, so intense, that its main mitzvah, the blowing of the shofar, and its most famous custom, eating apple and honey, are both without words. We can barely understand them, but we know that they are there, and every year we are tuned in. We are empowered to judge and enforce our own souls, to pull ourselves up by our bootstraps, to be the very best that we can be, better than we might even have dared to imagine. As that awesome Rosh Hashanah gateway cracks open once again, let's be ready.